And how we doing?
Larry Weber.
You bet. You bet. Long time.
Larry Weber. Yeah, nice to meet you. Bob Morrell. Nice to meet you. Coming together today.
You bet.
No problem.
We saved your chair, right?
Yeah, there's one here.
There is one, Evan.
Well, since we posted this as a legal meeting, we have, I'm going to call the meeting to order. It's close enough to 3 o'clock. We have an agenda in front of us. Are there any additions or corrections?
I have none. I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the agenda. Further discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Larry, do you want to give us a presentation, a little background
Yeah.
of what the Upper Cedar?
Be happy to.
I'm familiar, of course, with it, but I don't know how close it.
And, I just speak to you all today.
Just looking at your shirt otherwise.
The format here, but tell you a little bit about what we're doing, not only in the Upper Cedar, but also some statewide activities that are underway related to watersheds. And hopefully that'll help folks here understand a little bit more about what's happening there as well. Just by way of background, my name is Larry Weber. I'm the director of a program at the University of Iowa called IIHR Hydroscience and Engineering. And I've been the director of that program for 9 years. That program has been in existence since 1919, so about 95 years. And the purpose of our program is to study water, in particular river mechanics, river hydraulics, hydrology, flooding, precipitation monitoring. We also do a lot of work in fluid mechanics. We develop the mathematical models that the Navy uses to design all of their ships. So we're a big program. We currently have about 200 employees, about 200 staff.
Good work. Hello, Mark. No, I didn't realize there was another Mark.
Squeeze into the corner here. I know.
I'll
just stand.
Management meeting in a turkey today.
Supervisors? And there was really getting good.
And there was Mark Hume that was, Mark Hume that had signed, the last person to sign it. And Dennis Standing and I both, where's Mark Hume?
So, this program, about 200 people, it's a fairly large program prior to 2008. 99.9 and probably some more nines % of our work was all done outside of the state of Iowa. We do a lot of work for federal agencies, National Weather Service, NOAA, Office of Naval Research, National Science Foundation, and others. We do a lot of work for the power utility industries. A lot of work on river mechanics as it relates to thermal discharge, et cetera, transport. So we're a big program. In terms of ranking in the country, there is no ranking of hydraulics programs like there are rankings of other parts of science. But we consider ourselves probably the highest ranked program in this field in the U.S. and within the top 2 or 3 in the world. So it's a big program. Now, 2008 changed things considerably for a lot of folks in Iowa, and changed things for our program that we became more involved.
I'll see if I can find your chair.
Make that chair available.
One there.
Yeah.
I'll set it right here.
There's another chair.
Bring
There's another chair up there.
Get permission.
The color sepia you want.
All right. Around here. I thought I was gonna speak into like maybe 2 or 3 more supervisors today. but- Yeah, lock your door. Anyway, it's great to be here. We're part of this water program. In 2008, as I said, we started to say things changed. You know, we had a lot of rainfall, a lot of flooding in Iowa. The expertise that we have at this particular IHR organization was drawn upon by many communities in Iowa. We started doing flood recovery work in Iowa. Communities large and small. We've done a lot of mapping work to create flood inundation maps for USGS gauges in large communities. Charles City, I think we've got a map library up. Cedar Falls, Waterloo, Cedar Rapids, Iowa City, Des Moines, so on and so forth. As we were doing that work and as we went into the fall of 2008, the legislature learned of this program, this IHR program, and realized that we had some expertise in Iowa that could help Iowans recover from the flooding in 2008. And that led the legislature to requesting a proposal from the University of Iowa to start a state-funded flood center. And so myself and Deacon Krajewski, a colleague of mine, wrote a proposal to the General Assembly to establish the Iowa Flood Center. So that was discussed in the 2009 legislative session and was sworn beginning July 1st, 2009. So that started the Iowa Flood Center. Later that year, the Water Resources Coordinating Council, which is a governor's appointed group of basically agency heads, all with an interest in water, decided to embark on a process in the fall to put together additional recommendations to the legislature. So the Water Resources Coordinating Council, which I'm a member of, met and we came up over a period of 2 or 3 months with 22 recommendations that went to the legislature. And those recommendations varied across a lot of different elements, some related to funding, some related to policy. One of the policy elements was that the state should adopt the 500-year floodplain as the regulatory floodplain in Iowa. A lot of discussion about that in the Capitol. In the end, that was not seen as favorable, so that never came out of as any part of legislation. 3 things that were moved out of the legislature that year, though. One was an educational and outreach program related to flooding. We need to get more information out there about flooding to communities and to citizens. A second one was to create watershed management authorities. So people could come together in watersheds and start to plan for watershed improvement projects as a watershed rather than some other geopolitical boundary, rather than just a county or a city. But as a watershed management authority. And then the third one was to create a pilot watershed study that would build distributed flood damage reduction projects, principally farm ponds, wetlands, purchase of flood easements, projects that are already in practice. But to do that in a focused 1 or 2 small watersheds and do it intensely, so that enough information could be seen about the benefit of doing a project like that, the cost of doing a project like that, and then from that small watershed be able to scale that up to watersheds as large as the Cedar River, the Iowa River, the Des Moines River, because one of the big questions that was facing the state in recovery was, should Cedar Rapids be spending $700 million on a one-sided flood wall in their community, or could monies be distributed throughout the watershed that not only would reduce flood damages, but provide benefit in terms of soil loss, soil holding capacity, infiltration, water quality benefits, and other things. So that watershed project was discussed. So all 3 of those things were moved out of the legislature as legislation, but in 2010, when that work was being done, of course, the economy was contracting and the state budget was not in good shape, so they couldn't provide an appropriation for it. So nothing was funded. Later in 2010, Housing and Urban Development, that was providing disaster relief funds to Iowa, did an assessment of their disaster relief year of 2008 and discovered they had $312 million of funding that had not been allocated yet. So they made that available as supplemental funds to states that were receiving disaster relief. Iowa, being one of those states, was fortunate to receive the largest award and received $92 million of that $312 million. Okay? When HUD made that decision, for Iowa to receive the largest amount, they commented that the reason they awarded Iowa the most was because of the innovation shown in recovery. And they pointed to two things. One was the establishment of the Rebuild Iowa office to help all Iowans navigate through that administrative process navigate through that process of getting their FEMA funding and their recovery funding. And then the second thing they pointed to was the establishment of the Iowa Flood Center. So I got a call from the governor's office and acknowledging that. And when I received that call, I suggested that if they needed any more innovation, that we'd be happy to step up and help them with that. And I later got a call back from the governor's office wanting to know what we meant by it, or what I meant by that. And I quickly pointed to those three things that the legislature moved out as legislation: this education and outreach program, the creation of watershed management authorities, and this pilot watershed project. So the governor's office allocated $10 million to those three activities. $400K that's being used between Iowa DNR and Iowa State Ag and Extension Services to create an education and outreach program related to flooding. $800K that came out in kind of a two-phase program to create watershed management authorities. The phase one competition will provide up to $30,000 to establish 20AD agreements in those watersheds to create their WMAs. And then the phase two portion of that was to provide planning assistance dollars. And so that process has gone through both phases. Of course, the Upper Cedar River watershed was successful, was a successful applicant in the phase one to create the 28E. The phase two has been funded. The Upper Cedar has not yet received funding in that process. The Iowa Economic Development Authority is going through a process right now of what they call a clawback process, where they're hoping to pull monies back of unspent HUD funds and make that available to the Upper Cedar. But yet, that's yet to be determined. On the pilot watershed project, that was allocated $8.8 million, and the Iowa Flood Center was directed to lead that program. And we're doing that in two phases as well. We started as a first phase, which is a hydrologic assessment, where we have mathematical watershed models that allow us to calculate the runoff that's produced from different rainfall events. And we can do that from a historical perspective, looking at particular events like 2008, 2004, were big rain years and earlier. And when we do those simulations, we compare that with gauge data that we have at USGS gauges. We're also doing design storm events, what the 2-year precipitation, the 5-year, the 10-year, the 25, the 50, the 100-year precipitation events look like as well. That hydrologic assessment is important because when we start to spend the money in building these projects, many other state and federal watershed projects or programs are usually limited in how they can spend the funds, in that they build projects and the cost benefit is usually determined kind of within line of sight or eyesight. We're going to build a project here, it's going to reduce stream flow, that's going to protect a structure downstream, or allow us to replace an aging secondary roads bridge with a reduced size corrugated metal pipe or concrete box culvert. But oftentimes there isn't the kind of modeling or technical resource to be able to simulate a number of projects over an entire watershed and see what the stream flow reduction has been. And an example of that is one of the watersheds that we selected in our HUD phase one is Soap Creek, which is a small watershed in southern Iowa. And it's a really interesting story in Iowa because in the early to mid-'80s, landowners in Soap Creek had recognized that their land practices, they believed, were changing the hydrologic response of the streams in Soap Creek. They were flashier, they were coming up higher, they were seeing more repetitive flooding. And so they had engaged with NRCS, local design office, and created a watershed plan. And in that plan, they identified 154 projects that should be built in Soap Creek for reducing stream flow. The plan was issued in 1986. As of last year, they've built 132 of the 154 projects. But again, every one was evaluated in sort of line of sight. No one has ever gone in and said, well, we built these 132 projects, what's the stream flow reduction up in the headwaters? What's the stream flow reduction down at the lower part of the watershed. So we've done that, we're using that as a guide for some other work that we're gonna be doing in the Turkey and perhaps the Upper Cedar. And interestingly, in the headwater regions, they're seeing a reduction of 100-year precipitation, seeing a reduction in the stream flow of about 60%. At the outlet of Soap Creek, which is at about the Huck 10 scale, if you know what these hydrologic unit codes mean, at the outlet of Soap Creek, it's a reduction between 22 and 24%. Okay, that's significant for them, and it's significant, I think, for our state, because now the state is starting to recognize that all of the programs that have come out of USDA or have come out of EPA through DNR in terms of watershed improvements have a greater benefit than just the single project benefit that they're providing. So we need to understand what is happening at this larger system scale. So I think that's interesting. The other thing that I think is interesting, at least from my perspective, I've been here in Iowa my whole life. I grew up in Iowa, I grew up on a little farm in Dyersville, Iowa, been at the university my whole career. Water never really became as important as it is today until we went into 2008. And I thought, well, geez, finally the state is starting to recognize the importance of understanding water resources in Iowa. I thought that we had sort of understood that in 2009, of course, we had some flooding. 2010, we had the Lake Delhi Dam breach. 2011, the Missouri River flood. But it really wasn't even until last year when we had the drought that water resources started to impact everybody. The floods impacted people that lived along those streams or rivers. The drought impacted everybody. As we're moving forward in the state, it's obvious to me that the creation of watershed management authorities that has happened during this HUD funding period is the start of a process that the state is embarking on for a long, long time. And I think the collection of people, of counties, of cities, of soil and water conservation districts that have come together in the formation of these WMAs show the sort of the maturity and thinking and the organization necessary that are going to make them the most competitive for all future projects. And I don't care if it's a USDA funded project or a DNR funded project or a state funded project. The WMAs are the groups that are being looked to right now is recipients of funds, or their counties, or their soil and water conservation district offices as those recipients of funds, because the sense is that they're organized and they're ready to go. There's been other recent activities in terms of nutrient reduction. Of course, the state released this Iowa nutrient reduction strategy in the draft on the Monday before Thanksgiving. That's open for public comment. The public comment period is closed. They've selected 8 watersheds in Iowa that will be their priority watersheds. Some that have been organized as WMAs have been included in that list. It's going to go on and on, I think. We went through this process of going from our 4 watersheds that we're doing our phase 1 hydrologic assessments in, moving into phase 2. We, with the money that we have for projects, around $5 million, if we take that $5 million and we divided them up by 4, and we spread it out over those 4 watersheds, the benefit that we'll see will probably not be measurable, because these are still big watersheds. The Upper Cedar is a big watershed. The Turkey's a big watershed. The Middle Raccoon's a big watershed. So the process in this pilot watershed, or the Iowa Watersheds project, is not to spread it across evenly across those watersheds, but we've taken those 4 watersheds, we've done our hydrologic assessment, we picked 3, the Upper Cedar, the Turkey, and Soap and Chickasaw Creeks, to move into phase 2. And in the phase 2 part of that, we're not going to spread the money out uniformly over the whole watershed. We're going to select a single HUC 12. And we're going to put the focused implementation there. We want that single HUC 12. First and foremost, it has to be a HUC 12 that has landowner willingness.
Larry, you want to explain the HUC 12 real briefly?
That's where I need all my.
That was going to be my next question.
I need all my PowerPoints and maps. I don't know, Sarah.
What is a HUC?
So HUC is a term that's used by people like us. A hydrologic unit code. Think of it like a county. Okay?
I guess for your Spring Creek watershed would be a HUC 12 watershed. That whole, everything that goes into, that's about the, right, Dan?
Yep.
Thank you, Dan.
I got some handouts here too that I probably don't have enough with all of them.
We've got some, and with Dan's, I think
Yeah.
we'll have enough. They might not all be the
But it would be
same.
typically like the whole, or the Burr Oak watershed, it would be that whole watershed from the drains into Mitchell County.
So, we're showing the boundaries of the Huck 12s on this map. The whole area is a Huck 8. As the number gets bigger, the watershed gets smaller. So the Huck 12s are shown on here. Rock Creek, Headwaters Creek, Pearl Creek, Burr Oak Creek, Beaver Creek, Little Cedar, so on and so forth. So those are the Huck 12s. So we're gonna pick, and I'm gonna point to one, but this isn't the team that we selected it. We're gonna pick a watershed, one of these 12 sub-watersheds, and that's where we're gonna spend the project implementation plan. Now, we need landowner willingness in those watersheds, because it's a voluntary program. There's no condemnation, no one's gonna be forced to build projects. We need people that want to build projects. We want the watershed to be a watershed of intrinsic public value, a watershed that people go to, maybe they recreate in, maybe it's near a community, so that when we complete this project, we'll have visits to the watershed, people going there and seeing the benefits and realizing the benefits in the community, so that it becomes a pilot, it becomes an identifiable watershed that the next round of state funding and the next round of federal funding, folks in this larger Upper Cedar can say, look at the benefits that we realized in this small watershed. Gosh, if we could come up with another round of funding, we'd do another watershed and another watershed and another watershed, until we start to see it and realize that they're doing. When I've gone around and we're doing these meetings, it was interesting in some of our kickoff meetings that we had landowners say, well, this is interesting, but that's just not gonna work for us. And, we're not gonna give up our lands. We don't want these projects in our land. And that might be true. That might be true for individual landowners, but probably not true across the whole watershed. Down in Salt Creek, when they got started, that plan came out, and of those 154 projects that were identified, there's still unbuilt projects there. And some of those projects haven't been built because the landowners haven't been interested in a project. It's okay. But once they got started, and once they started building those projects, then neighbors knew about neighbors' projects, and neighbors saw the benefits. And we're talking about projects that range in size from half-acre farm ponds, the largest one's 26 acres, 26 surface acres. That landowner has one heck of a nice, project on their lands. Now, again, I'm not naive in saying that what's going on in Salt Creek is the same here, because they're completely different agricultural systems down there. There's a lot of livestock raising and bottomlands that's happening there, different from the row crop agriculture up here in some places. But when we kicked off our meeting in Salt Creek, we went there, I gave my presentation one afternoon, lots of questions, and involved in a room of people about a number like this. The next day, they did a watershed tour, and they had 90 people on the watershed tour. 2 school buses, everybody from, elected community members, a few, in fact, Congressman Loebsack was down there, a few state legislators were there, but a lot of landowners, a lot of farmers, a lot of people that were really proud of the watershed project that they had built. And it was really a day of community pride. So we toured around, I think we went to, 14 or 18 of those projects. And again, not being in the watershed, to me, the first one looked like the last one. But to the people on the bus, they knew where their land was relative to that particular project, or their children's land, or their friend's land. So it was interesting for me to see that. I think the purpose of coming here today, I guess I should have maybe started with that, was just to give you a little background for these different watershed-related activities that are going on in the state, talk to you a little bit more about the project that we're involved in with the Upper Cedar, answer any questions that you might have about how we're moving it forward. Certainly, the county is, by land area, a big county in the Upper Cedar, and I think there's some opportunities to participate. And so I'd be happy to stop for a minute, answer any questions, or perhaps you just have your own comments that you'd like to make.
Can you describe what these projects are gonna look like? I mean, you said you have to get the landowners to sign on. So what exactly are you going to do on those lands?
Yeah, so there's a lot of, we have a lot of options. I mean, most of it's gonna be pretty traditional work. Farm,
Buffer strips.
buffer strip enhancement, farm ponds. There's an interest in some watersheds of some agricultural lands that have had repetitive flooding, putting them into the emergency wetlands program. We have monies that we can use on one-time expenditures, so we can't enter into an agreement, over a 10-year period. But we could buy a flood easement on the property and do it one time. And that agreement then could be, depending on what we want to do, could be a 10-year agreement, could be a 30-year agreement, could be an agreement, perpetually, depending on what met that landowner's interest and what would help facilitate the project. Terracing is an option. We're not gonna go into a watershed and spend $1.5 million on terraces, because we won't realize the flood damage reduction that we need to. But terraces in terms of reducing soil loss to protect a pond project would be a good project. So we've been talking about that in the Turkey River as an example. We've got farm ponds, wetlands, so prep-like wetlands, which are wetlands that are used not only for holding a little bit of water back, but also doing some nutrient cycling. We can see some flood damage benefit from those. Buffer strip and buffer strip enhancement. Purchase of floodplain easements. We have an interest in potentially doing some gated tile work, where we do some, put some stop logs in at the outlets of agricultural drainage systems. Soybean Association has been interested in doing some of that work, I know. We'd be, real interested in partnering some of our funds with them or with whoever on projects like that. It's pretty wide open. Very few restrictions by HUD in terms of how we want to spend our money. We're looking for good ideas and looking for partners.
Bringing up the next question, in the future, going forward, is this gonna be a steady stream of money?
From HUD, no.
Okay,
Yeah.
now my next question,
So-
so where does the next money go?
Well, and so that's the question for all of us. And I think, and again, this is,
I just happened, I ran across today on the internet that Minnesota, they levy for all their projects out there. So anybody here, are you thinking of a countywide levy on property? Or would it just be like a drainage district? Those that affected, those who pay?
yeah, so at this point,
Well,
well, I'd like to answer the question.
oh, go ahead,
Yeah.
go ahead. I'm
So-
sorry.
That's okay. So, HUD will not provide additional funds. I mean, these dollars are 2008 dollars, okay? And again, I can't claim to know very much about the federal budget system. Those dollars were allocated, rather than putting them back into the federal budget, which would be a question I would ask. Those monies have been allocated to disaster relief for that year. So they're here, they're available to us, we're gonna spend those dollars. HUD will not continue this project, no way. So what do we do next? It's my belief that the creation of these WMAs and these pilot watershed projects are the future. And, as I've tried to convince folks, we need to be thinking about a 50-year vision. We need to be thinking about this for a long time. And I think that we all appreciate that we could do better as a state finding a balance between economic, agricultural, water, and natural resources. There is nothing that we want to do to reduce the agricultural productivity of this state. That's what the state's built on in many ways. We've got to keep that as a principal part of our state. But at the same time, if we put everything only onto our agricultural resources, that's the only thing that we want to do, then we're out of balance. So I think we've got to bring some balance back to that. I think the state recognizes that, the legislature recognizes that. I think we've got leadership in DC that recognizes that. So whether it comes to Iowa through Mississippi River Basin Initiative, MLBI type funding for nutrient reduction, which has a secondary benefit of flow reduction, or it comes here for flow reduction with a secondary benefit to nutrient improvement. I think we're going to continue to see that. The watershed management authorities, I think, are going to be, will show the type of organization, type of planning. We're going to get planning money for this. I'm convinced that we're going to get planning money. When you got a comprehensive plan for the upper Cedar, you got a hydrologic model, a hydrologic assessment of the upper Cedar, then you're going to be at the top of the list. for all your partners, all your technical resources out there to bring additional funding to the watershed. Whether, how this particular WMA operates, the flexibility that we have on the HUD funds is there is no predetermined cost share percentage. We could have these be fully federally funded. Some of the watersheds have said, no, we don't really want to do that. We want landowners to have a little bit of investment in this as well. So we're going to do a 75-25. That gives us the opportunity to build a few more projects rather than a few less projects. So I think in the future, Soap Creek, how they've operated, they have 132 projects. Most of the landowners have taken on the O&M. So that's just simple mowing, that's keeping woody tree species from growing on the dams. Most of the landowners have taken that on. Now the counties have made a commitment to each other. So there's 4 counties that cross, Soap Creek crosses. They've made a commitment to each other. They put a little bit of money. I think it's less than $10K total or something for some maintenance projects. I don't know exactly what their agreement is in their 2080, how that works, and who pays what rates. But that's really left to what goes on here. These HUD funds do not go to the WMA. The HUD funds for the implementation go directly to a county. And the county can then subcontract for the Soil and Water Conservation Office for the actual implementation, the design work, and the distribution of those funds. But the WMA is only here on the planning side of things, to help with the planning, I guess provide some guidance in terms of the selection.
How many years do you have to use that block of money up?
Well, again, with HUD, it's been interesting in that, most federal programs, probably the rules and regulations, are stacked that are pretty complex. With this, because of the uniqueness of the project, we have, certainly there are rules in terms of permitting and other things, but in terms of delivery of the project, what type of projects we build, and the duration over which we do it, it's pretty flexible. Now, with that said, I would like that we complete our project constructions in 2014, 2015, and 2016. We're looking at 3 years, so we're going to finish up our hydrologic assessment this year, get into that detailed design work, probably have a pretty light construction year next year, pretty heavy in 2015, hopefully light in 2016, kind of wrapping things up. But I think that 3-year period would be similar to like an MRBI type project where typically you're looking at about a 3-year period, so 4 or 5 year period. So I think that's probably that I think in a lot of ways we're moving about as fast as we can move to get it done in that period of time.
I have a question. Yes. Once these projects are completed, there's not really any continuing cost to the county or anybody, is there?
Well, again,
Well, it is, I mean, I take care of my land regardless, so I mean,
Yeah.
if you gotta mow it, I don't see that a burden on the county.
and so that's the way, I can just tell you by example, that's the way Soap Creek works, so the landowners, and again, interestingly, you go to 132 projects, and I'll bet 120 of them have a little swim dock, a little boat dock, maybe a little cabin, a little sand put down there for the kids or the grandkids to mess around in. A lot of them use them for livestock watering services as well, so they run a pipe off of them. They can't take livestock to the pond, so they are livestock restricted, but they can run a pipe off. Can run a pipe off. So they've been able to, that's been the posture, if you will, has come from the landowner willingness to say, you own the project, so this doesn't become a public project. It's not a county resource. It's not, the county isn't gonna. It's still private land. It's landowners that own it, and they put most of that maintenance onto the landowners. Now, they've had some landowners that have come forward and said, I've got a little bigger problem. Our pipe or our emergency spillway, we filled up the project. We had a little scour downstream. We got to put in a little riprap protection, and then they've been able to come back and say, look, you've got a little pool of funds here for O&M, that you put aside. Can we tap into that for this particular project? And I think that's worked quite well. So they've got a board. The board reviews those projects and they distribute some of them.
So basically, the county would direct where the funds could go. They're pretty much a pass-through
Well, see, at this,
Is,
so we're looking at the whole upper Cedar.
Yeah.
And so what's happened in the Turkey, I'll just describe that process. In the Turkey, each county proposed one hunt club. Now, in the upper Cedar, we're thinking maybe it'll work a little differently. There's a lot of hunt clubs that cross county lines. But so the county would propose, once the hunt club is selected, the money goes directly to the county then subcontracts that with their local technical services, NRCS, soil and water conservation folks. They actually administer most of the project, do the design work as staffing resources are available and so on and so forth. So, Kurt may speak to that, or somebody else might.
No, it'd be similar to act like our state cost share program.
Yeah.
Question, why not go directly to a soil and water conservation district?
It's a HUD issue, and that's an administrative HUD issue. We've been working with Iowa County Development Authority on that. Again, there's a process that they're used to using. How much effort do we put into trying to change that process versus keeping it an administrative process they're comfortable with? And at this point, they work with the Cedar County. So.
And it's too far down the line to keep that changed.
Well, it is, you know, and so the issue is, well, if we have to set up a subcontract, you know, to me, that's probably an easier administrative thing than changing, you know, what the mothership is doing.
You know, down south it's a little different than here because they got a little rolling, it's not all farm fields, and you're gonna have a hard time for somebody to take out some $10,000 and their
Absolutely.
farm ground to put in a retention pond of some sort.
Absolutely.
That's the problem you're gonna have around here, I think.
You know, and that's, you know, you know, that's been part of the discussion all along, and we recognize that. Now, you know, we are aware also that there are some, you know, landowners that try to enroll in emergency wetland programs and other things after 08 because of the repetitive flooding on some islands. You know, that might still be available, might still be interested. But yeah, 12 and 15 and 16 and 18 and $21,000 an acre. You know, it's far away to farm.
I believe there are some, there are landowners
Yeah.
that have come
There
forward.
are.
I was gonna say, Rick,
Yeah.
that's what that handout's
That's
about,
what this
those
is.
watersheds that have sites identified, that's people that have approached us. A lot of that is non-farm.
It's also building on some existing projects.
Building on
and
some
also
existing
some
projects,
permanent.
it's, you know, so there's,
Some good, actually, some good locations.
Well,
Yeah.
there's some opportunities also where these don't have to be active ponds year round. You know, we can do detention basin type projects as well, where the farmer would have the right to farm that. You know, but they have to accept the reality that if you get an event that actually, you know, inundates that detention basin, you know, they're gonna lose crop for that. But, you know, again, that's another opportunity to do some balancing where, you know, maybe you can still keep farming a little bit more of that land. Probably don't get the same kind of water quality benefits, you know, as you would if it was an active pond, but, you know, there's options out there.
Rick, I think I turn away at least 3 people every year asking to, does FSA have a program that I can build a pond? No.
Bass boat costs $22,000 and you have to travel an hour and a half, 2 hours to go fishing. If you go to a pond, you go on your lunch hour with your grandkids. I mean, I think there's you know, the key is what the commissioners are gonna, probably say is, there's an opportunity here. Would we be selected? We don't know, but we need to really, if we're going to put in a proposal for this funding, tell me commissioners from the line here, we need to make sure we have landowner interest, because there's no way that the Soil and Water Conservation District is going to want to go forward without knowing that we have, let's just say 22 people in this rural watershed, for example, that we would build a pond if we got 75% cost share. And some of those may fall because of soils and some other issues, but we're probably gonna gain, you know, that many more. Because the board, you know, my conscience here, I can't recommend to, you know, the Soil and Water Conservation Board to go forward with anything unless we have we know that we have X amount of commitments from people that are interested in going, and, you know, they've sat down and looked at 2 or 3 areas, and they've kind of highlighted 2 or 3 areas. Because, you know, when we look at it, farm ponds, or maybe some wetlands, I mean, there could even be potentially some roads, or, you know, where can we, you know, do something where you've got roads or problems with roads. Is there something that can be built into some infrastructure on a road that solves your problem? holds back some flood water. I mean, your engineer's gotta go, that's a whole nother issue, but there could be some potential where this could actually demonstrate we slow down some water that would help some downstream infrastructure on some roads also.
Or keep them in place.
Yeah, or keep them in place.
Picture shows
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, that costs some money.
So I guess, that's where the district is coming from, on the whole thing, and, again, this is one avenue of funding, that could be advantageous. Will it be selected? I know that Floyd County will be putting in a proposal, and Bremer County, I know is gonna put a proposal, because I've talked to both of them. But, we could put in just as good a proposal as what they can, but we have to know, so we can do some pre-work to find out, do we have landowners interested? Because if landowners aren't interested in the projects, we've got to come way back.
Don't we have some already?
Oh, yeah, like I said, the maps
Dan's
prove
been
that,
working
and we, we've got folders from past CREP site applicants. That second, I think the second page here with the craft and rep sites identified. We didn't have staffing to visit every one of those dots on that map when we started our MRBI search for a watershed to work in for the Spring Creek watershed, but there was approximately 24 landowners visited, and out of those, about half of them said they would be interested if there was funding, that they would likely be interested in a CREP style wetland. So yeah, we've got interest around the county. It would just be to, like Kurt's saying, would be to focus in on that area of land, that HUC 12, that has the most interest, enough interest with, in that type of projects. And as good as it sounds to be 3 years long there, that's still a pretty short period of time when you start thinking from going,
No, we're moving as fast as we could,
Yeah.
I think 3 years.
Yeah, so,
Everything's in alignment.
to go from Mr. Landowner, are you interested, to actually having a completed project, it's a really quick amount of time, actually, so. But, so we need to do a little assessment ahead of time, see that there's
So
genuine
basically,
interest.
if Mitchell County would join this Upper Cedar, then you folks in Soil and Water would come up with a HUC proposal, and I believe we'd have to have this done already by the end of May.
I believe we could.
I'm gonna let the board members talk on that one.
I think we could.
I guess we would work with you board of supervisors.
Because it's kind of a partnership. I mean, you guys, obviously, there's parts of the county that could benefit from this by not washing rock or washing roads. But also, it helps downstream. I mean, you can't look at it as it's just helping. It's gonna help, it's gonna be a cumulative effect. And it's not gonna be, I don't think, it's not a one-time thing. This is gonna be over the next 20 years, things are gonna be taking place. And the way I see it is, let's be a little proactive, let's not be reactive. When you're fixing roads, you're reactive. Let's prevent those from blowing out or washing the asphalt off. It's gonna happen, it is.
This is all developed pretty quickly, but we've already had some discussion about possible projects. Under discussion.
That's a 1.5 million. Quite a bit of money, at least for, I think it's for our county, 40,000 people.
That's one of the one HUC, right?
Yeah, it just comes in this money.
I might add, from our experience in the Allen Soybean Association, we've been involved with Watershed for 10 years. A lot in the Boone, the Raccoon, and Des Moines in that area, but money tends to flow from outside to areas that are organized, and that's what's so important. If you have an organized group or an area, there's outside funding that comes from grants and places. It drops out of the sky, it seems like. But if you're organized and you are set up in an organized manner to manage those funds as the donor sees fit, you're eligible. But without being part of an organized watershed, it's kind of spinning your wheels in a lot of respect, and you work on a lot different scale. But I think that was.
Larry, you might have addressed this when I wasn't totally tuned in, but isn't part of the project to find some good models and then spread to the rest of the watershed? So that, we're talking about one HUC 12 now, but we're looking for models that will work throughout.
Exactly. That's, you know, the point that I've been trying to make repeatedly is that we could take the whole funding and just put it out into projects. And that would be great, and we would see benefit from that. We wouldn't really know how much benefit we would receive from that, and we wouldn't really have a plan for the next 25 and 50 years for how we're going to do the rest of the watershed. We wouldn't really know how much money it would really take to do the rest of the watershed. So the part that we're doing is this early overall hydrologic assessment of the whole Huck 8. We're gonna build that project. Once we built that project, then we're gonna have really good information to say, look, for this kind of mosaic of projects or recipe of projects, we saw this benefit. And the cost to doing that over a second Huck 12 or over the entire Huck 8, we can make an estimate on that. Be an educated estimate, still an estimate, but we have some sense for that. You know, rather than having someone, you know, in the Capitol trying to say, well, I need $600 million for watershed improvements for the upper Cedar, when nobody could really then quantify whether the benefit would really be realized in the Cedar.
And do you think that the steady flow of money into water quality projects that have been demonstrated through our county here, in the future, will they be commingled or directed to water quantity and water quality control?
To me, it's all about the water, whether it's quantity or quality. The two are so closely coupled. And we had some discussions this morning over in Postville where, you know, that sense is becoming realized by many, many more people. It doesn't matter if it's water quantity, because we're getting water quality benefits. It's water quality kind of focused, we're still getting water quantity benefits. Being organized is going to be defined by whether you're part of the WMA. I mean, that's it, you know, whether that's right or not, it's a simple way to do it. And I think that's what we're seeing. And so nutrient reduction is going to mobilize tremendous resources in the state over the next 10 or 20 years. If we want to see this voluntary aggressive program, and we still want producers to be producers, and we want water quality to improve, hundreds of millions of dollars are going to come into water quality type programs. Are you organized? Are you part of the WMA? That box gets checked very quick. And so to me, these first groups, the Upper Cedar, the Turkey, the Middle Raccoon, Indian Creek, the ones that created these 20ADs are out on the front end. You know, they're out on the front end, and you know, Soap Creek, they created their 20AD back in the mid-'80s. You know, they completed 132 projects. You know, as you mentioned, money seems to fall out of the sky onto them. Now, they were part of PL 566, and they had some other earmarking, you know, that they were able to do, which isn't as doable today. You know, money's become available, I think, when you're organized, when you have a plan, comprehensive plan, when you've got these hydrologic tools, you're going to be out in front of everybody else.
Mark, if Mitchell County would join this group, do you foresee that the group could actually force taxation on a particular county, or?
No.
I mean, these funds are basically going to be outside funds always coming that we can.
Yes, absolutely. The legislation that created the Watershed Management Authority, I ran out of the House Rebuild Iowa Disaster Recovery Committee when I was in the state legislature. And strictly prohibited is taxation. The Watershed Management Authority has no authority to levy a tax on any of its member organizations, nor does it have the authority to condemn land. It's a pretty voluntary organization. Our Upper Cedar watershed is comprised of 23 separate entities, of which the Mitchell County Soil and Water Conservation District is one, and the cities of St. Ansgar and Stacyville in Mitchell County. We have all the other counties that are bordered, included in the Upper Cedar watershed: Worth, Floyd, Chickasaw, Butler, Bramer, and Blackhawk. And so we also have a 7-member executive committee according to our 20AD and our bylaws. And that 7-member executive committee, I'm the chair of the organization.
a member of a soil and water conservation district in Blackhawk County, Sherm. Lundy is the vice chair. Our treasurer is a member of the city council from Floyd. His name is Charlie Newman. We have Eric Butler, who is a soil and water conservation district from Worth County. We have a farmer member of the Board of Supervisors in Butler County named Tom Heidenworth. And we specifically chose the final member of our executive committee, and that happens to be our secretary. Our secretary is Karen Domjanovich, and she represents the Mitchell County Soil and Water Conservation District as the alternate. When we formed our organization, our Watershed Management Authority, we were, as you know, we were all given the opportunity to join, and you considered it at that time. And for reasons you didn't, but we chose Karen to be on our executive board of directors, so there would be a representative, a voting representative on the executive board from Mitchell County. And so we're prepared to have you join in with us. We'd like you to consider that. We're very supportive of working with you and look forward to that. You are the biggest land area of any of those counties I mentioned. I think virtually 90% of the land in Mitchell County is in the upper Cedar. And we'd like to work with you in any way possible that you'd like to. This is important work, and it's the work of the future, and we'd like you to join with us.
May I ask, what was your reasoning for not joining originally? Or what are your concerns? Could they be addressed here today?
Well, there was a couple of,
No pointing fingers.
there was a couple of letters from lawyers for the county's insurance, the risk management aspect, and then there was a rebuttal letter from another lawyer from another county that pointed out some flaws in the 2080. And I just happened to notice that email you got today, somebody had talked to the AG's office. I'd like to see the AG's opinion on that. They said they talked, but there was nothing written, so that was part of the problem. The word authority, well, why do they want cities and counties in this watershed? And really, it should be soil conservation as far as I'm concerned, but soil conservation has no levying authority. And that was brought out in the letter also, that in the future, and you see it in Minnesota, they do levy for that type of projects and things. Could that happen in Iowa? And would this watershed authority have the, and Mark said no, but if you read the bylaws, you can't get out of this agreement unless all of the projects are paid for and, one thing and another. So that was part of the problem. I think it's a very good idea to do all this. But here again, you just said this is one-time money, so where is the money going to come from in the future, I guess is what my question is. And are we going to petition Congress for the money, or the state legislature, or is it going to fall to the counties and the cities?
So I'd like to, if I could comment on that, I think that I tried to express this with the WMA when I met with them. There was some disappointment when they weren't funded for the phase 2 planning dollars. And as I've tried to share, when you put an organization like this together, it's never about one opportunity. It's never about one grant opportunity. The group that I lead is 200 people. We weren't put together for one grant. And we live in a soft money, grant funded, contract funded world. So, that's easy for me to say. That's the life that I live every day. Not everybody here has that same thing. I have a business person that might appreciate that as well. To me, it can't be about this particular project, because if you're trying to put this thing together just to attract $1.5 million, then you've kind of missed the purpose, the vision, and mission of why this is coming together. So it's a little naive, quite honestly, but the reality is that we've seen monies come to Iowa throughout the past several decades that have been directed towards watershed improvements. It's undeniable. That's gonna continue to happen. Watersheds that are organized are gonna be at the front of the list. I mean, I think those are kind of simple things. Now, your concerns about taxation and other things, I can't speak to that. I think Mark has.
And that's fine, but those, you asked the question, was my concern. I think going forward, probably would be a good thing for Venture County to sign on to this. I would like to see one of these Hucks projects done or whatever, just to, really to see, what it can do in the flood, because we did drive around during the 2008 flood and, and basically watched our road fall into the river, and, so there's something we can do that way.
Well, and this, the MRBI that's been mentioned here, Spring Creek is a funded MRBI area that the Soil and Water Conservation District competed for. And that started out as a $1.2 million 5-year project. It's gonna end up by the end of next year with the projects that the staff has went out and sold. We're probably gonna be closer to the $3 million mark of money coming in. We're actually stealing money from the other MRBI areas, bringing it into the area here because of the interest that is shown. And that's water quality, but all those things still have this offset of this. Now, this funding, that's one set of funds, and Spring Creek, we basically, as the commissioner, we need to take that off the table because we have adequate funding, and we would not want to double up because we would not be able to spend another 1.5 million out there in their time frame to get their goals in that watershed. Whatever the supervisors decide, I think the Soil and Water Conservation District is willing to support and do what we have to do with the proposal if you see the fit to go move forward. I think that the board, I don't speak out of turn here, thinks that we have some good projects that could give, let's be honest, a lot of summer economic money for the local contractors in the area that sit all summer long, and probably a lot of their employees may collect unemployment, that these are projects that probably would be completed outside that normal season of construction, which we're always looking for economic development and how we keep more people employed, of course. But again, this is a short term. There are other things coming down the pipe that the board's going to be looking at, but we don't want to talk about those things because those, we're still in the whole big planning process. And that whole area plan, it's going to come together in a plan for this project here.
I'm representing Osage, and we never joined. We don't have any water going through us or not. I guess I don't know if we should be joining or not. If it's just.
You're in a watershed, though.
Yeah.
All your water runs off into the Cedar River.
Right.
So, from that aspect, you're as involved as we all are.
And the watershed management, tell me if I'm wrong or right, Mark.
Yeah.
Flooding is one of 5 issues that I think addressed, isn't it, in the goals and objectives of the management authority?
Yes, sir.
I think don't ask me to bring up the other 4 or 5. I know one is water quality,
Yeah.
and there's water quantity. Like even safe water drinking, if you've got a private well, if there's something. These are things that, as a whole group, you work together at. From all the people up and down the river, and I have no idea if you have some concerns on whatever. Stacyville is high and dry, but if they've got flooding in part of their main streets and part of their town. But yes, I can answer, but it's one of 5 major. The flooding is the big issue. It's been the big issue that's probably jump-started all. Am I right on the conversation?
Well, that was another thing that you mentioned that now, we're backing water up and we're holding water and say it backs up into somebody's property, does damage. Okay, who pays
The key that indicates this is a voluntary program by a landowner here that agrees to install that practice on his farm, and the board here would be crazy not to say you have to maintain that practice for 15 or 20 years. And in our design work, we cannot back water up or affect the neighbor without an easement agreement between this landowner and this landowner if they're affected. I
So
mean,
that
that's
is
policy
basically-
that,
It's designed so that it will never back up on anybody's property.
and if it does, we
That's a
have,
spillway or
if
something.
if it does, if it's gonna affect adjoining property, then, our engineering people require an easement that these both parties agree that's recorded in the courthouse, well, wherever the courthouse is.
You got that right.
But it's,
This is as good as it gets.
yeah, I worked out of here for 2.5 years, but that's the key is, none of these projects, they're volunteer, and we can't, it's like any other soil and water conservation practice that we installed. We just did the big Coca-Cola project out along the Little Cedar River that Little County Conservation Board. You know, when Jeff Lutz designed everything and worked, we made sure we didn't affect, because we put a dike across a downstream landowner. So we do our best to affect that, because we can't, because there's always that, well, and then I guess the agreement is between this landowner and that's because that landowner is responsible and actually, it's his project. It's not, I hate to, it's not the county's project, it's not our project. We would just be supplying a cost share amount that's agreed to in advance for that project. Am I saying anything wrong?
Well, and I would just add to that, Kurt, you know, that your design method, you know what the backwater effect is, so there's no surprise. I mean, so there isn't, you know, something that's built, you know,
It's like any project, you know, every once in a while you get a road project or something you don't expect, and you have to deal with it later. You never have those, do you?
Stan and Bob do, but
No, we try our, and these, most of the practices we're talking about are small practices that are, you know, are not going to change, you know, feed I'd love to have 150 acre lake out here, and then Stan and I could buy the land around it to sell for housing, but that's.
Get a floodplain
Good place for it.
But I guess, you know, I think the board here is interested in potential watersheds that could, you know, they sat down and looked at some, but they would, I'm guessing you would be greatly, you know, if the supervisors wanted to be part of that decision-making process, I think that'd be great.
Can you come to every meeting?
how often do you meet?
Sometimes too often.
Well, I guess there's been a lot of questions answered here today for me. I mean, I could support it going forward, I guess.
Is that a motion?
Can't do it today.
Why not?
Not on the agenda.
So just discuss.
Oh, okay, just discuss. Well, would you be willing Tuesday morning so that maybe soil and water can start, because they have a short fuse in order to.
Well, and one of the things is, you know, we can't go forward
Well,
because we're not an applicant, of course.
No,
and-
but what I'm asking is if we Tuesday morning would, I mean, you, like, right now would have an indication that we're gonna go forward, you could start.
We would start preliminary planning.
Yes, that's what I'm,
I don't hear any.
Right, Dan and Jason?
Against it.
You bet.
That's what I, you know, so I guess if they're fine with
Mark?
it.
Just so you understand the mechanics, on Wednesday at 6 PM, our full board of the Upper Cedar Watershed Management Improvement Authority will be meeting. On our agenda that night is a report on the meeting between the Mitchell County Supervisors and Larry Weber and the Flood Center. If you chose to join or agree to join on Tuesday, one of the things that the chairperson can do is amend the agenda of the meeting. We could consider Mitchell County joining the Watershed Management Authority. It takes a majority vote of the 23 board members to do so, but I could put that on our agenda for consideration for new business on Wednesday. Also on that agenda, we're going to develop and agree to a criteria for the selection of the Huck 12. We won't hear a presentation that night. We'll hear a presentation perhaps 6 weeks from then. So there's a little bit of time yet, but we could, glad to have you. If you make that decision, we'll put it on our agenda to see if we can get you approved. And I have you have my full support going towards the full board to do that.
Put it on for an action item on Tuesday.
Now, does the county and the city both have to agree to join, or is it one or the other?
They are actually separate entities.
They're separate.
Okay.
So
I would think it
the
would
city
be,
signed the letter of intent. I saw that today.
Right, we initially approved it back when it all started, and then we all never signed it because
Don't
when
be
you
pointing-
got,
don't be
it was
pointing
the county, the county didn't join, so we held back.
Well, you know,
but even like your retention pond over here, you know, there's always a possibility of something else like that, that if you were in part of that HUC 12.
So that's why
why
water
would-
back.
Yeah, I mean, that's again why it would be advantageous for
Or a
those
good
things.
example too would be all the work that's been done in Charles City. The rain gardens, the pervious pavers, or, you know, different things like that that would be, slow the water down and improve water quality, so.
And the Turkey River West Union is going to be the community in the HUC 12 that is selected for phase 2 implementation. Because West Union's got a tremendous downtown revitalization program with stormwater management. Again, probably built like this, they're up on top of the hill. Really.
I have a question. By doing that, are you potentially gonna, that water maybe gonna be forced up into people's basements that didn't have problems before? If you're gonna do that, is that gonna bring pressure into
No,
someone's home?
again, those are designed to, when we talk about a rain garden, it's actually got a better drainage system under it than the soil that was there to begin with. So it just filters the water in a different way, slows it down. It'll still go through a pipe of some sort, but there's a lot of design that goes into that stuff before it's just slapped up.
Yeah, I don't think, it's not to back up the city streets or anything like that.
Right,
It's just to get it away, but retain it before it hits the river.
Besides that, they're pretty.
Somebody dropped this cell phone outside.
Thank you.
I would probably think an easy way of explaining it, any way you can slow water down just enough to help those downstream without causing much damage up above is the ultimate goal. You know, and that's just a lot of little retardations here and there going on, and infiltrations and things like that that have a major effect on the Cedar Rapids and in places like that downstream. You know, anytime we can create a sponge effect up here, you know, on the upper end, that's an ultimate goal.
Supervisors, do you have any other questions of the group, or?
No, I think we should just put it on for an action item for Tuesday.
Public, do you have any other questions?
I'd like to thank you, gentlemen, for hosting the meeting today.
Well, thanks for coming.
Appreciate it.
If
If there's nothing else for the good of the cause, we'll stand adjourned at 4:05.